The philosophical scripture, Meditations on First Philosophy, is brought to you by Not a Prophet org, the place on the internet to find spiritual guidance powered by artificial intelligence. Meditations on First Philosophy by René Descartes, written in the year 1641, copyright 1996, Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. This file is of the 1911 edition of the Philosophical Works of Descartes, Cambridge University Press. Translated by Elizabeth S. Haldane. One prefatory note to the Meditations. The first edition of the Meditations was published in Latin by Michael Soley of Paris at the sign of the Phoenix. In 1641 cum privilegio et approbation doctorum, the royal privilege was indeed given, but the approbation seems to have been of a most indefinite kind. The reason of the book being published in France and not in Holland, where Descartes was living in a charming country house at Indegist near Leyden, was apparently his fear that the Dutch ministers might in some way lay hold of it. His friend Pierre Mersenne took charge of its publication in Paris and wrote to him about any difficulties that occurred in the course of its progress through the press. The second edition was however published at Amsterdam in 1642 by Louis Elzevir, and this edition was accompanied by the now completed objections and replies to the edition from which the present translation is made is the second just mentioned, and is that adopted by M.M. Adam and Tannery as the more correct, for reasons that they state in detail in the preface to their edition. The work was translated into French by the Duc de Lines in 1642, and Descartes considered the translation so excellent that he had it published some years later. Clercellier, to complete matters, had the objections, also published in French with the replies. And this, like the other, was subject to Descartes' revision and correction. This revision renders the French edition specially valuable. Where it seems desirable, an alternative reading from the French is given in square brackets. Elizabeth S. Haldane, to the most wise and illustrious, the Dean and Doctors of the Sacred Faculty of Theology in Paris. The motive which induces me to present to you this treat is so excellent, and when you become acquainted with its design, I am convinced that you will also have so excellent a motive for taking it under your protection, that I feel that I cannot do better, in order to render it in some sort acceptable to you, than in a few words to state what I have set myself to do. I have always considered that the two questions respecting God and the soul were the chief of those that ought to be demonstrated by philosophical rather than theological argument. For although it is quite enough for us faithful ones to accept by means of faith the fact that the human soul does not perish with the body, and that God exists, it certainly does not seem possible ever to persuade infidels of any religion, indeed, we may almost say, of any moral virtue, unless, to begin with, we prove these two facts by means of the natural reason. And inasmuch as often in this life greater rewards are offered for vice than for virtue, few people would prefer the right to the useful, were they restrained neither by the fear of God nor the expectation of another life. And although it is absolutely true that we must believe that there is a God, because we are so taught in the Holy Scriptures, and on the other hand that we must believe the Holy Scriptures because they come from God, the reason of this is, that, faith being a gift of God, he who gives the grace to cause us to believe other things can likewise give it to cause us believe that he exists. We nevertheless could not place this argument before infidels, who might accuse us of reasoning in a circle. And in truth, I have noticed that you, along with all the theologians, did not only affirm that the existence of God may be proved by the natural reason, but also that it may be inferred from Holy Scriptures that knowledge about him is much clearer than that which we have of many created things, and as a matter of fact is so easy to acquire, that those who have it not are culpable in their ignorance. This indeed appears from the wisdom of Solomon, chapter Roman 13. Where it is said, howbeit, they are not to be excused, for if their understanding was so great that they could discern the world, and the creatures, why did they not rather find out the Lord thereof? And in Romans, chapter I, it is said that they are without excuse. And again in the same place, by these words, that which may be known of God is manifest in them. It seems as though we were shown that all that which can be known of God may be made manifest by means which are not derived from anywhere but from ourselves, and from the simple consideration of the nature of our minds. Hence I thought it not beside my purpose to inquire how this is so, and how God may be more easily and certainly known than the things of the world. And as regards the soul, although many have considered that it is not easy to know its nature, and some have even dared to say that human reasons have convinced us that it would perish with the body, and that faith alone could believe the contrary, nevertheless, inasmuch as the Lateran Council held under Leo X in the 8th session condemns these tenets, and as Leo expressly ordains Christian philosophers to refute their arguments and to employ all their powers in making known the truth, I have ventured in this treatise to undertake the same task. More than that, I am aware that the principal reason which causes many impious persons not to desire to believe that there is a God, and that the human soul is distinct from the body, is that they declare that hitherto no one has been able to demonstrate these two facts, and although I am not of their opinion, but, on the contrary, hold that the greater part of the reasons which have been brought forward concerning these two questions by so many great men are, when they are rightly understood, equal to so many demonstrations, and that it is almost impossible to invent new ones. It is yet, in my opinion, the case that nothing more useful can be accomplished in philosophy than once for all to seek with care for the best of these reasons, and to set them forth in so clear and exact a manner that it will henceforth be evident to everybody that they are veritable demonstrations. And finally, inasmuch as it was desired that I should undertake this task by many who were aware that I had cultivated a certain method for the resolution of difficulties of every kind in sciences, yet a method which it is true is not novel, since there is nothing more ancient than the truth, but of which they were aware that I had made use successfully enough in other matters of difficulty, yet I have thought that it was my duty also to make trial of it in the present matter. Now all that I could accomplish in the matter is contained in this treatise. Not that I have here drawn together all the different reasons which might be brought forward to serve as proofs of this subject, for that never seemed to be necessary excepting when there was no one single proof that was certain, but I have treated the first and principal ones in such a manner that I can venture to bring them forward as very evident and very certain demonstrations. And more than that, I will say that these proofs are such that I do not think that there is any way open to the human mind by which it can ever succeed in discovering better. For the importance of the subject, and the glory of God, to which all this relates, constrain me to speak here somewhat more freely of myself than is my habit. Nevertheless, whatever certainty and evidence I find in my reasons, I cannot persuade myself that all the world is capable of understanding them. Still, just as in geometry, there are many demonstrations that have been left to us by Archimedes, by Apollonius, by Pappus, and others, which are accepted by everyone as perfectly certain and evident because they clearly contain nothing which, considered by itself, is not very easy to understand, and as all through that which follows has an exact connection with, and dependence on that which precedes, nevertheless, because they are somewhat lengthy, and demand a mind wholly devoted tot air consideration, they are only taken in and understood by a very limited number of persons. Similarly, although I judge that those of which I here make use are equal to, or even surpass in certainty and evidence, the demonstrations of geometry, I yet apprehend that they cannot be adequately understood by many, both because they are also a little lengthy and dependent the one on the other, and principally because they demand a mind wholly free of prejudices, and one which can be easily detached from the affairs of the senses. And, truth to say, there are not so many in the world who are fitted for metaphysical speculations as there are for those of geometry. And more than that, there is still this difference, that in geometry, since each one is persuaded that nothing must be advanced of which there is not a certain demonstration, those who are not entirely adepts more frequently err in approving what is false, in order to give the impression that they understand it, than in refuting the true. But the case is different in philosophy, where everyone believes that all is problematical, and few give themselves to the search after truth, and the greater number, in their desire to acquire a reputation for boldness of thought, arrogantly combat the most important of truths three. That is why, whatever force there may be in my reasonings, seeing they belong to philosophy, I cannot hope that they will have much effect on the minds of men, unless you extend to them your protection. But the estimation in which you company is universally held is so great, and the name of Sorbonne carries with it so much authority, that, next to the sacred councils, never has such deference been paid to the judgment of any body, not only in what concerns the faith, but also in what regards human philosophy as well. Everyone indeed believes that it is not possible to discover elsewhere more perspicacity and solidity, or more integrity and wisdom in pronouncing judgment. For this reason I have no doubt that if you deign to take the trouble in the first place of correcting this work, for being conscious not only of my infirmity, but also of my ignorance, I should not dare to state that it was free from errors, and then, after adding to it these things that are lacking to it, completing those which are imperfect, and yourselves taking the trouble to give a more ample explanation of those things which have need of it, or at least making me aware of the defects, so that I may apply myself to remedy them for yen when this is done, and when finally the reasonings by which I prove that there is a God, and that the human soul differs from the body, shall be carried to that point of perspicuity to which I am sure they can be carried, in order that they may be esteemed as perfectly exact demonstrations, if you deign to authorize your approbation, and to render public testimony to their truth and certainty. I do not doubt, I say, that henceforward all the errors and false opinions which have ever existed regarding these two questions will soon be effaced from the minds of men. For the truth itself will easily cause all men of mind and learning to subscribe to your judgment, and your authority will cause the atheists, who are usually more arrogant than learned or judicious, to rid themselves of their spirit of contradiction, or lead them possibly themselves to defend the reasonings which they find being received as demonstrations by all persons of consideration, lest they appear not to understand them. And finally, all others will easily yield to such a mass of evidence, and there will be none who dares to doubt the existence of God and the real and true distinction between the human soul and the body. It is for you now, in your singular wisdom, to judge of the importance of the establishment of such beliefs, you, who see the disorders produced by the doubt of them. 5. But it would not become me to say more in consideration of the cause of God and religion, to those who have always been the most worthy supports of the Catholic Church. Preface to the listener. I have already slightly touched on these two questions of God and the human soul in the discourse on the method of rightly conducting the reason and seeking truth in the sciences, published in French in the year 1637. Not that I had the design of treating these with any thoroughness, but only so to speak in passing, and in order to ascertain by the judgment of the readers how I should treat them later on. For these questions have always appeared to me to be of such importance that I judged it suitable to speak of them more than once, and the road which I follow in the explanation of them is so little trodden and so far removed from the ordinary path, that I did not judge it to be expedient to set it forth at length in French and in a discourse which might be read by everyone, in case the feebler minds should believe that it was permitted to them to attempt to follow the same path. But having in this discourse on method begged all those who have found in my writings somewhat deserving of censure to do me the favor of acquainting me with the grounds of it, nothing worthy of remark has been objected to in them beyond two matters. To these two I wish here to reply in a few words before undertaking their more detailed discussion. The first objection is that it does not follow from the fact that the human mind reflecting on itself does not perceive itself to be other than a thing that thinks, that its nature or its essence consists only in its being a thing that thinks, in the sense that this word only excludes all other things, which might also be supposed to pertain to the nature of the soul. To this objection I reply that it was not my intention in that place to exclude these in accordance with the order that looks to the truth of the matter, as to which I was not then dealing, but only in accordance with the order of my thought perception. Thus my meaning was that so far as I was aware, I knew nothing clearly as belonging to my essence, excepting that I was a thing that thinks, or a thing that has in itself the faculty of thinking. But I shall show hereafter how from the fact that I know no other thing which pertains to my essence, it follows that there is no other thing which really does belong to it. The second objection is that it does not follow from the fact that I have in myself the idea of something more perfect than I am, that this idea is more perfect than I, and much less that what is represented by this idea exists. But I reply that in this term idea there is here something equivocal, for it may either be taken materially, as an act of my understanding, and in this sense it cannot be said that it is more perfect than I, or it may be taken objectively, as the thing which is represented by this act, which, although we do not suppose it to exist outside of my understanding, may none the less be more perfect than I because of its essence. And in following out this treat is I shall show more fully how, from the sole fact that I have in myself the idea of a thing more perfect than myself, it follows that this thing truly exists. In addition to these two objections, I have also seen two fairly lengthy works on this subject, which, however, did not so much impugn my reasonings as my conclusions, and this by arguments drawn from the ordinary atheistic sources. But because such arguments cannot make any impression on the minds of those who really understand my reasonings, and as the judgments of many are so feeble and irrational that they very often allow themselves to be persuaded by the opinions which they have first formed, however false and far removed from reason they may be, rather than by a true and solid but subsequently received refutation of these opinions, I do not desire to reply here to their criticisms in case of being, first of all, obliged to state them. I shall only say in general that all that is said by the atheist against the existence of God always depends either on the fact that we ascribe to God affections which are human, or that we attribute so much strength and wisdom to our minds that we even have the presumption to desire to determine and understand that which God can and ought to do. In this way all that they allege will cause us no difficulty, provided only we remember that we must consider our minds as things which are finite and limited, and God as a being who is incomprehensible and infinite. Now that I have once for all recognized and acknowledged the opinions of men, I at once begin to treat of God and the human soul, and at the same time to treat of the whole of the first philosophy, without, however, expecting any praise from the vulgar, and without the hope that my book will have many readers. On the contrary, I should never advise anyone to read it excepting those who desire to meditate seriously with me, and who can detach their minds from affairs of sense, and deliver themselves entirely from every sort of prejudice. I know too well that such men exist in a very small number. But for those who, without caring to comprehend the order and connections of my reasonings, form their criticisms on detached portions arbitrarily selected, as is the custom with many, these, I say, will not obtain much profit from reading this treatise. And although they perhaps in several parts find occasion of cavilling, they can for all their pains make no objection which is urgent or deserving of reply. And inasmuch as I make no promise to others to satisfy them at once, and as I do not presume so much on my own powers as to believe myself capable of foreseeing all that can cause difficulty to anyone, I shall first of all set forth in these meditations the very considerations by which I persuade myself that I have reached a certain and evident knowledge of the truth, in order to see if, by the same reasons which persuaded me, I can also persuade others. And after that, I shall reply to the objections which have been made to me by persons of genius and learning to whom I have sent my meditations for examination, before submitting them to the press. For they have made so many objections, and these so different, that I venture to promise that it will be difficult for anyone to bring to mind criticisms of any consequence which have not been already touched upon. This is why I beg those who read these meditations to form no judgment upon them, unless they have given themselves the trouble to read all the objections as well as the replies which I have made to them. 6 synopsis of the 6 following meditations. In the first meditation I set forth the reasons for which we may, generally speaking, doubt about all things, and especially about material things, at least so long as we have no other foundations for the sciences than those which we have hitherto possessed. But although the utility of a doubt which is so general does not at first appear, it is at the same time very great, inasmuch as it delivers us from every kind of prejudice, and sets out for us a very simple way by which the mind may detach itself from the senses, and finally it makes it impossible for us ever to doubt those things which we have once discovered to be true. In the second meditation, mind, which making use of the liberty which pertains to it, takes for granted that all those things of whose existence it has the least doubt are non-existent, recognizes that it is, however, absolutely impossible that it does not itself exist. This point is likewise of the greatest moment, inasmuch as by this means a distinction is easily drawn between the things which pertain to mind yen, that is to say to the intellectual nature yen, and those which pertain to body. But because it may be that some expect from me in this place a statement of the reasons establishing the immortality of the soul, I feel that I should here make known to them that having aimed at writing nothing in all this treat is of which I do not possess very exact demonstrations, I am obliged to follow a similar order to that made use of by the geometers, which is to begin by putting forward as premises all those things upon which the proposition that we seek depends, before coming to any conclusion regarding it. Now the first and principal matter which is requisite for thoroughly understanding the immortality of the soul is to form the clearest possible conception of it, and one which will be entirely distinct from all the conceptions which we may have of body, and in this meditation this has been done. In addition to this, it is requisite that we may be assured that all the things which we conceive clearly and distinctly are true in the very way in which we think them, and this could not be proved previously to the fourth mediation. Further, we must have a distinct conception of corporeal nature, which is given partly in this second and partly in the fifth and sixth meditations. And finally, we should conclude from all this that those things which we conceive clearly and distinctly as being diverse substances, as we regard mind and body to be, are really substances, essentially distinct one from the other. And this is the conclusion of the sixth meditation. This is further confirmed in this same meditation by the fact that we cannot conceive of body excepting in so far as it is divisible, while the mind cannot be conceived of excepting as indivisible. For we are not able to conceive of the half of a mind as we can do of the smallest of all bodies, so that we see that not only are their natures different, but even in some respects contrary to one another. I have not, however, dealt further with this matter in this treatise, both because what I have said is sufficient to show clearly enough that the extinction of the mind does not follow from corruption of the body, and also to give men the hope of another life after death, as also because the premises from which the immortality of the soul may be deduced depend on an elucidation of a complete system of physics. This would mean to establish in the first place that all substances generally yen, that is to say all things which cannot exist without being created by God yen, are in their nature incorruptible, and that they can never cease to exist unless God, in denying to them his concurrence, reduce them to naught. And secondly, that body, regarded generally, is a substance, which is the reason why it also cannot perish, but that the human body, inasmuch as it differs from other bodies, is composed only of a certain configuration of members and of other similar accidents, while the human mind is not similarly composed of any accidents, but is a pure substance. For although all the accidents of mind be changed, although, for instance, it thinks certain things, will others, perceive others, etc., despite all this, it does not emerge from these changes another mind. The human body, on the other hand, becomes a different thing from the sole fact that the figure or form of any of its portions is found to be changed. From this it follows that the human body may indeed easily enough perish, but the mind or soul of man, I make no distinction between them, is owing to its nature immortal. In the third meditation, it seems to me that I have explained at sufficient length the principal argument of which I make use in order to prove the existence of God. But none the less, because I did not wish in that place to make use of any comparisons derived from corporeal things, so as to withdraw as much as I could the minds of readers from the senses, there may perhaps have remained many obscurities which, however, will, I hope, be entirely removed by the replies which I have made to the objections which have been set before me. Amongst others there is, for example, this one, how the idea in us of a being supremely perfect possesses so much objective reality, that is to say participates by representation in so many degrees of being and perfection that it necessarily proceeds from a cause which is absolutely perfect. This is illustrated in these replies by the comparison of a very perfect machine, the idea of which is found in the mind of some workman. For as the objective contrivance of this idea must have some cause, i.e., either the science of the workman or that of some other from whom he has received the idea, it is similarly impossible that the idea of God which is in us should not have God himself as its cause. In the fourth meditation it is shown that all these things which we very clearly and distinctly perceive are true, and at the same time it is explained in what the nature of error or falsity consists. This must of necessity be known both for the confirmation of the preceding truths and for the better comprehension of those that follow. But it must meanwhile be remarked that I do not in any way there treat of sin yen, that is to say of the error which is committed in the pursuit of good and evil, but only of that which arises in deciding between the true and the false. And I do not intend to speak of matters pertaining to the faith or the conduct of life, but only of those which concern speculative truths, and which may be known by the sole aid of the light. Nature, in the fifth meditation, corporeal nature generally is explained, and in addition to this, the existence of God is demonstrated by a new proof in which there may possibly be certain difficulties also, but the solution of these will be seen in the replies to the objections. And further, I show in what sense it is true to say that the certainty of geometrical demonstrations is itself dependent on the knowledge of God. Finally, in the sixth, I distinguish the action of the understanding 7 from that of the imagination. 8. The marks by which this distinction is made are described. I here show that the mind of man is really distinct from the body, and at the same time that the two are so closely joined together that they form, so to speak, a single thing. All the errors which proceed from the senses are then surveyed, while the means of avoiding them are demonstrated, and finally all the reasons from which we may deduce the existence of material things are set forth. Not that I judge them to be very useful in establishing that which they prove, to wit, that there is in truth a world, that men possess bodies, and other such things which never have been doubted by any one of sense, but because in considering these closely we come to see that they are neither so strong nor so evident as those arguments which lead us to the knowledge of our mind and of God, so that these last must be the most certain and most evident facts which can fall within the cognizance of the human mind. And this is the whole matter that I have tried to prove in these meditations, for which reason I here omit to speak of many other questions which I dealt incidentally in this discussion,